I usually have to take a minute to just kind of center myself and get in my space and kind of focus. I'm really excited to be here with you guys tonight. Thank you for letting me come and talk about one of my favorite topics. I will explain why it is my favorite topic, not because it is a happy topic, but there's actually a reason for it. I am Jennifer. I have been with Harford County Public Schools as a school psychologist for about 18 years. And then about 6 years ago, I decided that I just wanted to do something a little bit different and add a little more fun to my life. So I've gone into private practice. Right now, I'm working with Safe Harbor Behavioral Care part-time. And I can certainly answer any questions about counseling or about mental health services. I think a good therapist is like a tattoo. I think everybody should have one. So I am very pro-counseling because I think there are times when we're not able to see what's really going on for us because we're looking from the inside. And it sometimes takes someone on the outside to be able to give us that objective, reflective mirroring. And then we can better understand how to respond in our life. So today we are talking about depression and suicide. As I said, it's one of my favorite topics. Not my favorite topic certainly because it's a happy topic, but it's one of my favorite topics because depression and suicide are so often misunderstood. And because they're misunderstood, we do not always respond in the best way, in the most helpful way, in the most healthy way possible. And then we end up with people who either are spending a lot of time in pain, or they end up seeing at some point they really don't have any other out than to die by suicide. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and to talk about depression and to give some information, and then also to talk about when people really do feel like they fought that battle so hard and so long, and they come to terms with not being able to fight it anymore. We're certainly going to push and resist that as much as we possibly can and believe that suicide is preventable and that depression is highly treatable. So one of the reasons that depression is so hard to understand and I think goes undiagnosed and also underappreciated in our society is that can't really see it all that well. There are a lot of conditions that we can see. So we certainly can see if someone is going through cancer and they're being treated for cancer. We certainly can see if someone doesn't have the use of their legs. How many remember this one? This is actually chickenpox. So back when I was little, I remember chickenpox was the thing that if one person in your class got it, everybody was getting it. And that meant a whole lot of itching, but it also meant staying home and watching cartoons a lot. So the good with the bad. Certainly we can see a broken arm, and you get 2 points if you know what this is. Anybody know what this is? What is it? Diabetes. Thank you. Good job. That one is a good job. That one is particularly personal for me because my daughter looked beautiful in her prom dress, and right on the back of her arm was this great little CGM. But she didn't let it hold her back, which was awesome. So medical conditions that we can see, I think, trigger a response in us to be understanding, to be sympathetic, to know how to respond, and how to be helpful. But this is what we see when the condition is depression. So we may see lots of different behaviors because depression manifests in lots of different ways for lots of different people. We also can come up with our own explanation if we don't really know what's going on. So, well, he's always been disorganized. You know, he's always been a little scattered. We've just kind of dealt with it. You know, he sometimes gets a little down, but that's just who he is. This is definitely terrible 3s, right? Terrible 4s. It's definitely what's going on there. We can have anger outbursts, and one of our, we talk a lot about road rage, or we talk about anger management problems, or I have anger issues. But anger actually can mask depression in a lot of cases. Fun fact, with young adults and teenagers, they have a whole different way of showing depression. Adults do tend to see more of the traditional types of symptoms, do see fatigue, do see sadness, do see withdrawal. Our teenagers, our adolescents, they're acting out. You know, you may see mood swings, you may see irritability, you may see aggression, a lot of sarcasm. Some people can mask it really well, so you may not even know that that's what's going on for them. They may look just fine at a party. They may be able to be on when they need to be on. But then when they're at home, they might be a whole different person. Well, he's just going through a growth spurt. I know that he's sleeping a lot, but you know, he's just growing, and that's pretty normal. And you know, she's just going through a period where she's just kind of sad, but she's going to be fine. You know, she's got a lot of people around her. We can explain away a lot of the things that we see, which means that we don't always point it back to depression. So, because depression isn't something that we can see on the outside, it's something that's going on the inside. I'm a big fan of visuals because it helps me understand something that's abstract. I use a lot of metaphors, I use a lot of pictures, a lot of images. So I was trying to come up with an image that would kind of represent what depression really is and what's happening. And one of the things that I kind of came up with is a funhouse mirror. And this actually points to why saying to someone, "What's the matter? You don't have anything to be depressed about. Your life is fine." Why that's not only a really insensitive thing to say, and why it's also really inaccurate. Because someone who is depressed, it's actually their thinking. It's our filter that's not quite right. It's our perception that's not clear. So it's like we are seeing the world through a funhouse mirror. Everything that's happening, we're distorting. And we're... Say that again?
It's probably not a very fun funhouse mirror then.
That's a very insightful thing to say. That's a very insightful thing to say. It's actually a very painful mirror. And it's all happening on the inside. But one of the things that then, one of the results is that everything that we see and everything that we hear and everything that everybody says to us can sometimes be filtered through that mirror first, and then we process it. So the goal of recovery of depression is really to clear that mirror, to gain a point of clarity, to get some outside support, to work on our thinking so that we really can see things as they are rather than what our perception is telling us. So one other reason, if that wasn't enough to confuse us about depression, one other reason that depression is so hard to grasp is that it's part of a spectrum with depression on one end of the extreme, and on the other end is being human. All of us have gone through periods of being sad. Is there anybody in here who hasn't been sad at some point? Anybody in here who wasn't sad in the past 2 weeks? I go through ups and downs sometimes during the course of the day. But that's one of the reasons why depression is hard to understand, because we do all get the blues sometimes. It's not only normal, it's actually also instructive. One of my favorite things to tell clients, especially my young adults, because my young adults will come in and they'll say, you know, they're coming in with the perception of, you know, let's fix it, let's get all of these feelings away. And I say, well, the first bad news is we're not going to get rid of all these feelings. That's not our goal. I'm not trying to get rid of depression. I'm not trying to get rid of anxiety. Those things are instructive. They're indicators. They help us understand our experience. They help us understand how to relate to other people, to our world, how to be healthy. Don't get me talking about the autonomic nervous system and how that relates to emotions, because then you might not get home till like 10 or 11 tonight. But lost my train of thought that quick? That is loss of concentration, which can be a symptom of depression, but maybe not. So what I tell my kids is that we're not trying to get rid of those feelings because they're instructive. What we're trying to do is bring them to a place of being managed and help us to better understand where they're coming from, what's triggering them, and then how we can respond. So how do we look at depression? How is that different from the blues? How do we know which is which? Well, the first part that we're looking at, and we're going to be looking at 4 different caveats: intensity, duration, level of impairment, and settings or situations. The first one is intensity. I love these little people, and if you want the PowerPoint, you can look at this a little bit. There's a ton of emotional thermometers out there. They're all over the place. This is by far my favorite, and probably always will be, just because these little people make me happy. They are so exaggerated and so cute, and it brings me a little smile just to look at them. I use emotional thermometers all the time because they really are very instructive, again, with where I'm at and what I need to do. What we know is that intense emotions are happening around 8, 9, and 10. There's not a whole lot good happening around 8, 9, and 10 if we want to respond to something in a very calm, conscientious, careful way. This is when we are in crisis mode, my child's running into the middle of the street, and I don't have time to sit and think about my best course of action. I need to react. That's what's happening at 8, 9, or 10. I'm in fight, flight, freeze mode. When I'm coming down to about 6 or 7, I might still be really distressed, but then I'm in a place where I can handle it. I'm not overwhelmed. I can manage it. One of the ways that we can tell depression from the blues is through intensity. So people who really are struggling with, let's say clinical depression, they're living up here. The problem with that, not only is it extremely uncomfortable, but the problem with that is then small triggers, things that would bump us up, like 2 steps, if I'm already living at an 8, and then, my boss gives me a really critical comment that I didn't expect, that might be a 2 bump, but now I'm at a 10. Whereas if I wasn't in a period of depression and I'm generally walking around carrying a 4 or a 5, a 2 bump is going to take me up to 7. I can still process that. But depression is happening up here. That's when we go into duration. If we are living in that level of intensity, that level of distress, for a significant period of time, we're going to be saying that that's more of a depressive type of a profile than it is just the blues. The blues come and go. The blues are supposed to come and go. Depression doesn't really come and go so much. Depression kind of sticks around. There actually is criteria related to depression, to duration, and I'll go over that in a minute. Level of impairment. Level of impairment is how much does this mess up my life? So what kind of effect is my experience having on my ability to work, to get done what I need to get done at work, to interact with my family without setting everybody off, to socialize, to have friends, to have good relationships, to go out and do fun things. All the things that I need to do during my life, are these symptoms having a profound impact? And then the last is settings or situations. So with the blues, it might be situation specific. So I might kind of have the blues at work because things are just really kind of stressful sometimes, and that might come and go at work. But if you plunk me down on the beach and, you put something chocolatey in my hand and I can just sit and listen to the waves, I'm not feeling any of that. I'm feeling very calm and very happy. But if I am having those symptoms of being down, of being tired, or being irritable, and that's happening across settings in my life, that's where we really start to question whether we're looking at a depression. Okay, so the bad news. The bad news is this a significant problem for our country and for our world today? If you're thinking that it's not, we could have a longer discussion. What we have seen is that depression is actually on the rise. There is evidence that rates of depression have increased since COVID, and I'll actually give you a piece of information about that. As of 2020, we had over 2.5 million youth with severe depression. So I was kind of curious about that, and I just did the math. So right now, my placement is Joppatown High School, and we have, let's say, 800 students. So if I do 800, and I took there was another statistic that talked about what this equates to. What this equates to is in a classroom of 30 students, 2 to 3 kids are going to have severe depression. That's when I started thinking, and that's when I then did the math. So in my school of 800 students, if I broke that down by 30 students per classroom and 2 to 3 students per classroom having severe depression, I'm looking at 52 kids. 52 kids, I second that, wow, thank you. 52 kids walking around my building with severe depression. That's huge. The statistics do get scarier. Suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States, with over 45,000 deaths by suicide in 2020. That's about 1 death every 11 minutes. If we break this down further, we have 12.2 Americans who just considered suicide, 3.2 who've planned an attempt, and then 1.2 who've actually made a suicide attempt. And we're seeing these numbers continue to grow. I was listening to a podcast a while back, and it was by Bessel van der Kolk. And I actually can spell his name for you if anyone wants it. But he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And he talks a lot about trauma. And he talks a lot about PTSD and about effective treatment methodologies for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of the interesting points that he made during the podcast was the conditions that set up trauma. So the conditions that set up trauma there are several consistent conditions. A lack of safety, a loss of control, financial insecurity or instability, loss of social connections, changes of routine. Does this sound like anything that was happening during COVID for us as a nation? As a nation, we were ripped from our social connections. We were ripped from our sense of stability. We were ripped from our coping strategies and the activities that we do that manage our stress. As a nation, we were being traumatized through the pandemic. It's really understandable how then we're seeing increased depression in the wake of that. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to highlight this, but there actually is diagnostic criteria for depression. And how do we do that? We do it with a very thick book called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. It's actually now in its text revision. I started as a school psychologist during DSM-3 and then DSM-4, and now we're up to DSM-5. And what they're really doing is they are developing profiles of people who share common characteristics so that then we can identify what's going on with them and then recommend treatment strategies to help. So the diagnostic criteria for major depression is 5 or more symptoms. It's got to be during a 2-week period, and at least one of them has to be depressed mood or loss of interest. And you can see the list of symptoms, so there have to be 5 or more, and one of the 2 of them has to be 1 or 2. We have here down at the bottom that there also needs to be a clinically significant distress or impairment. So if our symptoms, our experience, is not affecting us day to day, technically it doesn't meet the criteria for a disorder. So what does it actually look like? So that's the diagnostic, that's the professional criteria, but what does depression look like? Like I said, depression is a spectrum. So we can have mild to moderate to severe, and then on top of that, it can look different from one person to the other. So you could get any or all of these types of behaviors and experiences and others. We may see sadness, so someone may actually look sad or down. Withdrawal, pulling away. My young adults, both at my high school and also in my private practice, I'm not a fan when I tell them no closed doors. I brace them for it, and I tell them, I'm going to say something you're not going to like, but I'm going to recommend to mom and dad or aunt and uncle and grandparents and whoever you live with not to have you close your door. Because when you close your door, when you close your bedroom door and the rest of the house is on one side and you're on the other, you actually are withdrawn from the family and from the connection. Keep your door open. I trust you. I promise you, your parents are not snooping around you and not listening to your conversations around the corner. But even having the sounds from the rest of the house, even having people walking by, is reinforcing that we are in a family unit, that there is social connection, and social connection is important. Yeah.
What's the fourth one from the bottom?
Good eye, very good eye. 1, 2, 3, thank you very much. Very good eye. Perseveration. I'm gonna jump to that since you asked. Perseveration is not being able to get your mind off a topic. So being preoccupied. So you have a fight with your best friend, and 3 weeks later, you're still thinking about it and you can't get it out of your head. Does that make sense? We may see mood swings. We may see anger outbursts. A lot of what people say is something that we're going to pay attention to. So statements reflecting hopelessness. Changes in sleeping or eating, and this can go either way. So it can either be sleeping way too much or not sleeping at all, or eating way too much or not eating at all. It can also, the important point is changes. Some kids just have to have 10 hours of sleep, but they've always had to have 10 hours of sleep, and they will probably likely into adulthood continue to need 10 hours of sleep. It doesn't mean that they're depressed. We're looking for changes. Weight gain or weight loss. Changes in motor activity, and motor activity is referring to movement and how we move. So either all of a sudden we're really, really restless and we're moving really quickly and we're all over the place all the time. And again, changes. If you've got a youngster who's all over the place all the time, and that's just their natural state, that's probably not reflective of depression. Or very slow movement, just very sluggish, very fatigued. Poor hygiene, this is a big one that we see. Somehow when people are struggling with depression, hygiene is one of the things that kind of goes out the window, and it kind of makes sense. If you're just overwhelmed with what you're feeling and with your experience, then how you present yourself to other people may not be as important, and it also may be more effort than you feel like you can put into your day. Distractibility and inability to concentrate, lack of follow-through, and changes in behavior. Again, those drastic changes, those mood swings up and down. Keeping in mind that when we're talking about adolescence, we may see more of the irritability and the mood swings. We may see more of the anger outbursts, the aggression. We may see more of the acting out rather than internalizing. Yeah.
Yeah, question. If lack of follow-through is one of the signs of depression, then why would people who are depressed follow through on suicide then if they have lack of follow-through?
Let me think on that for a second. That is a gold star kind of a question. That is a gold star kind of a question. I don't have a great answer for that. But that's a gold star kind of a question. I appreciate that. One of the things I can tell you is that we're going to get to suicide, but since you brought it up, suicide does tend to be the end of the road, quite literally, but also emotionally for people who are struggling with depression when it's going in that direction, for people who follow through with depression. Okay, I don't mean by any means that depression always leads to suicide. It absolutely does not. But for people who are struggling with depression and suicide is the direction that they go, they're perceiving it as the end of the road, and it's actually perceived as a relief. So it may be that the lack of follow-through is they're trying to get to a place of not having pain. Good question. Yeah. Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, being fixated on that feeling better and not being able to get off of it? I hadn't seen that connection, but that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the good news. Good news. Finally gotten to the good news. Okay. So, and you bring up a really important point. What's your name? I'm sorry.
Chrissy.
Hi, Christy. Oh, hey, Christy. How you doing? How you doing? And what's your name, beautiful girl? Hi, Megan. That brings up a really good point, because the other thing that we always want to remember, we're looking for constellation of behaviors. We are not looking for one single solitary symptom, and then we are, hanging our proverbial depression nail right on it. We're looking for a constellation. We're looking for a profile. So if the only thing that's going on for, say, a young adult is a significant weight loss, that's the only thing, and we can look at their social interactions are good, their hygiene is good, they're looking positive, they're talking about happy things, they're engaged at school, they're following through, everything else is looking good, but they have that one single solitary symptom, it's not likely going to be a mental health condition. It's likely going to be something else. We're looking for groups and profiles for a symptom here and a symptom here and a symptom here and a symptom here. What I always tell my parents or my teachers or my clients, we treat what's in front of us. And we continue to explore, and if it's there, it'll stick. So we treat each and every one of those symptoms. We continue to explore some other questions that we have. Could this be a mental health condition? And if it is there, as we explore and as we treat, it will keep coming up until we come to the right answer. All right, so I finally see it. Got some concerns. So now what? By the way, does this all make sense so far? Do I still have everybody? I know that it's late on a Wednesday. Do I still have everybody? Okay. Now what? The really good news is that depression, like so many mental health conditions, is highly treatable with the proper supports. And there's a variety of supports. We may find that one particular strategy or one treatment or one support is what works for one individual, but just like one particular chemo may work for one cancer patient but not another, we may find that that same regimen may not work with this person who is also struggling with depression. So we have to individualize, we have to explore, we have to continue to put things in place to address what we're seeing. As I already said, I'm a big proponent of having counseling, not just because that's what I do and it's what I love to do, especially with young adults, but also that there are people, even our closest supports, even the people who are closest to us, may not be able to be as objective and may not be able to mirror back what they're seeing in the most clear, precise way. And having someone who is trained in profiles and in a framework can be really key to helping someone clear up that picture and put those pieces together. So definitely seeking professional support. But that professional support can also come in a number of different ways. For some of our young adults, it may be going to talk to their school counselor. For some of our other adults, it might be going to talk to their pastor or their administrative staff at the church, and we have the best pastors that we could possibly hear. It could be seeking an outside therapist. Could be seeking a different type of therapy, like equine therapy, where you're working with horses, or if you have a little one, it could be play therapy. So there are lots of different ways that you can seek out professional support. Consider a medical evaluation. Having information about depression as a medical condition doesn't lock us in to any particular treatment regimen or any particular choice. It doesn't mean that if I go and speak to my doctor or if I go and do a consult with a psychiatrist that I have to be put on medication. What it just means is it's more information for where I am based on that professional's expertise, and then what are some options for some treatment. I've had some clients that go for a consult with a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and then 2 or 3 months down the road, they determine that they want to try some medication to address their depression or their anxiety. I have some that go for a consult and decide that that's not the route that they want to go. But having more information is always a good thing. Kind of relates back to that emotional thermometer that I love so much, because if we are living at an 8 or a 9, what kind of processing can we do from a mental health professional? If our processing starts at a 7, a 7.5, if we have to first get our emotions to that point of being able just to come down enough to where I can access that rational part of my thinking. We can't do that if our emotions are sky high and if we're living in that state. So it's important to consider all options that way. Validate and normalize. One of the things that I always like to tell my clients, to recognize when people are maybe minimizing how they feel or not affirming that they have a legitimate emotional experience, or telling them, if you just think your way out of it, you really don't have any reason to be depressed. No one can say that because they're not seeing it from our own perspective. What's much more helpful is to validate. I understand that you're hurting right now. I can see how great you're hurting right now. I don't know why, but I'd like you to try to explain it to me. I want to be able to help. And normalize. So many of my young adults come in, and even some of my adults come in, and they think that they're the only one. They're the only one going through the emotional experience they are. How many of us sitting in church on Sunday, if Pastor Jay said, who's struggling with depression, how many of us would feel comfortable raising our hand? A lot fewer than would feel comfortable saying how many of us sometimes have asthma. Might feel a lot more comfortable doing that. So whatever we can do to normalize that this is an experience that so many people struggle with, that so many people are working through, and that there is an avenue toward recovering. Engaging or facilitating activities that challenge depression. Depression and anxiety are two persnickety little challenges of their own. Anxiety and depression have different mechanisms. Anxiety is challenged and recovered if we run toward what makes us anxious. We very well can't get over something that makes us anxious unless we actually do it. Depression is where we are running toward things that contradict depression. It's really, really hard to be depressed when you are in a good social network and you have good social support. It's really hard to be depressed when you're doing exercise that you enjoy. It's really hard to perseverate when you're focusing on mindfulness activities, and mindfulness is just whatever brings us to staying in the moment, what helps us to center and to be present in the moment. Because what depression wants to do is, depression wants to tell us that in the future you're always going to feel like this. It's never going to get any better. And what you're feeling now is basically what you're facing toward infinity, right? Mindfulness helps us recognize this is one moment, and in our next moment, my experience is likely going to change. That's contrary to depression. Novel or new activities is also contrary to depression. It's kind of hard to be depressed when you're trying something new, when you're engaging that part of your brain. Creative pursuits, journaling, hobbies, all of these are things that help us to explore our experience, to think with a different part of our brain, to be in the moment rather than to be perseverating, and can work counter to depression. And then it's important to recognize and immediately address a crisis. We have to know when we're either seeing someone in a crisis or when we are actually at a crisis point ourselves. And we need to be able to respond appropriately. So now we're moving more into suicide. As clinicians, as therapists, as helpers, we have to believe, and we do believe, that suicide is entirely preventable. We also understand that people who die by suicide, and the correct term at this point is not committed suicide or completed suicide, it is died by suicide, because it is recognizing that suicide is the result of a mental health condition, and it is not something that is always completely under someone's volitional control, and very often it is absolutely not under their complete volitional control. So while we affirm and uphold that suicide is preventable, we also recognize that after someone has died by suicide, it is likely because they have just fought the battle as long and as hard as they possibly can, and they've gotten to a point where that condition is just overcoming them. If we can help us understand that this is one moment in time, and if I can just get to the next moment, there's the possibility of getting help and getting support. Okay, so there are some risk factors to suicide. Certainly mental illness, whether it's depression, conduct disorder, and conduct disorder is more behavioral types of disorders, and substance abuse has been shown through research to be risk factors for suicide. They do increase the risk of suicide. Family stress and dysfunction that's not addressed. Environmental risks, including the presence of a firearm in the home. This one is particularly important whenever you have, particularly an adolescent or someone in your home who is struggling with the ups and the downs of a mental health condition. Think very carefully about the types of things that you have in your home that are accessed, not only because of a planned attempt, but more also because of impulsive attempts. We don't want to make it easier for anyone that we love or our kids or even strangers coming into our home. We don't want to make it any easier for them to hurt themselves. Situational crisis, like the traumatic death of a loved one, abuse, and also violence. So these are things, and this was actually taken from this resource from the National Association of School Psychologists. NASP has a plethora of resources on mental health and also on suicide. So those were some risk factors. So what are some warning signs? What are some things that we may see if someone that we know, someone that we love, really is considering taking their own life? Suicidal threats can be in the form of direct or indirect statements. This is one that I have a special thought about. I have some parents who have heard so often, "I just wish I was dead. I just want to die. I don't want to be here anymore. You don't want me here anymore. I just don't want to be here." And I've had a number of parents or siblings or even teachers say they're just doing it for attention. It's just attention. And a while ago, I realized that the best response to that is, yeah, okay, so what? If someone is trying to get attention through a suicidal threat, there's a reason that they're trying to get attention that way. So why do they need the attention that way? Because when we say they're doing it for attention, it's almost as if we are able to dismiss it. But if we reframe that and realize that attention isn't in and of itself fills a function, and what is that need that's being met, what is really going on, then it changes how we respond. And all of a sudden, we take it serious each and every time we hear it. Suicide notes and plans, including online. How many people in the past 10 years have been saved because someone who was suicidal sent out a Facebook post and someone else caught it and then they sent help? How many people have been saved that way? We don't have any idea of knowing, but we know that it's a lot. Unfortunately, prior suicidal behavior does increase the risk of future suicide attempts if the mental health condition is not addressed and treated. Making final arrangements. We have some of our young adults who, start to really contemplate suicide, and they will come in and they will start giving their stuff away. Those prized possessions that they never want to share with their brother or sister, and all of a sudden they're giving them away. A preoccupation with death. Mass depression, and mass depression is those other behaviors, those externalizing behaviors that we may not attribute to depression. As we've talked about, the irritability, the anger outbursts. What we may be seeing is just somebody's just being really, really crabby for a long period of time. It could actually be masking some depression that's going on. Changes in behavior, appearance, thoughts, and or feelings. One important point to also note, sometimes things look a whole lot better. So if we all of a sudden know that we have someone in our life who is struggling with depression, and all of a sudden we see this miraculous change in demeanor, in presentation, all of a sudden they're looking a whole lot happier. All of a sudden it seems like everything's fine. We really want to dig in a little bit and explore that. Because sometimes what we've seen is that when someone has finally made the decision that they are going to make a suicide attempt, there is almost that relief that is happening. And that then attributes to, it's almost over. It's almost over. I don't have to wait too much longer to feel better. So what to do? There's a lot that we can do. One is absolutely remain calm. Because remember, if someone is at the point of a crisis and they are at that heightened state of that 8 or a 9, if we come in and we fuel that with our own response, then we're not de-escalating them. We're keeping them where they're at. So one of the best things, actually the most fundamental thing that we need to do is to be very calm, be as unemotional as we can, ask some questions, and not always ask open-ended questions, but closed-ended questions, because sometimes there's so much emotion going on, there's so much happening, that the person that is struggling may not be able to pull out those thoughts and explain. But if we give them a choice, okay, is this something related to work, or is this something related to home? Well, it's something at home. Is this something that you're having with someone in our house, or is this something that you've been struggling with on your own? So giving choices can sometimes help the person that you're supporting to work through where they're at and articulate that better to you. Focus the concern on their well-being and avoid being accusatory. Goes without saying, but maybe it doesn't go without saying. We never want to say, you have so much to live for. Because yes, that makes a lot of sense, and yes, they do. And when someone is at that lesser emotional state, that's a very appropriate thing to say, to help them get into that rational thinking. But when we're at a crisis state, you've got so much to live for. Don't be ridiculous. Why would you even think that way? That is really going to come off as being accusatory. It's going to come off as being invalidating, and that's not what we want to communicate when somebody's in a crisis. Listen, I paid a lot of money for a master's degree, and I got one beautiful sentence out of it. You feel X because of Y. I remember the first time, and my mom probably doesn't remember this, but I learned that phrase in my classes, and I was talking to my mom back, I think it was actually like a payphone. I was talking to my mom on a payphone, and my mom was just talking about what was going on for her today, and I tried it, and I said, so Mom, you feel really frustrated because things didn't work out the way that you expected. And it was like manna from heaven when she said, yeah, that's exactly what I feel. It was like, and I was like, oh my gosh, this works. This is awesome. And I've used that over and over again. Now, one of the things I love about young adults is that when I get it wrong, they got no bones about telling me, no, Jen, that is not what I meant. And then I can correct and say, okay, explain it to me again. Because what we want to know is we want to understand how you're feeling and why you're feeling it. So what I hear you say is you feel X. you're feeling really down, you're feeling really sad, you're feeling really lonely, you're feeling really disappointed because you got yelled at today at work and didn't expect to, because nothing went right at home today, because the kids are running around and not taking what you're telling them seriously. Putting together how they're feeling with why and checking it, is that really what's going on for you? Reassure them that there's hope and that they're not going to feel like this forever. That's not invalidating how you're feeling now, but it is saying it's not going to go on like this. It's going to be okay. Do not judge. Constant supervision. Never leave anyone alone if you really feel like they're in a crisis state. If you really feel like they are unsafe, don't leave them alone. And then make sure that you are removing everything that they could use to harm themselves from their area, from their home. And then get help. So protective factors. It was funny because when I was looking at reviewing the list of protective factors, and these are things that I know really well, when I was looking at it, I actually was thinking about Christ. There's nothing in the gospel that says that Jesus struggled with depression, but he certainly had periods of being sad, certainly had periods of being down as much as he was human. But he had some really amazing protective factors, thinking about a strong support system and who he kept close to him and who he confided in. And thinking about communication. Was there anybody who was anywhere near as exceptional at communication as Jesus? Connected to his community, connected to his family. Strong faith and spiritual values that promote health and hope and belonging. Definitely very self-aware. Sense of purpose. It's kind of huge. A positive self-concept. No evidence that Jesus needed mental health care. But all of these other protective factors, we can look to Jesus and say, you're setting a model for us about what we need, not only to be physically healthy, but you're setting a model for us about what we need to be mentally healthy. You're welcome to, I've told my kids, my clients, to snap a picture of this, to have it in your phone. If you wanted the PowerPoint sent, it's certainly on the PowerPoint. There's a lot of places to get help. And what I've always told my clients or my kids, even if you're not sure, let them figure it out. Let them be the ones to tell you, no, I think this is a transient situational thing. Let's see how we can get you hooked up with some resources, and let's get you some help. But I think that you're going to be all right with the right supports. Let them figure out whether it's a crisis. If you have any doubt as to whether this is an unsafe time for you or for someone that you love, reach out. There are a lot of places that are right there waiting for those moments where it seems like we don't have choices, and they're reminding us that we do have choices. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, there's actually a crisis text line, Harford County, and then the Klein Family Harford Crisis Center. This can be walk-in. Any day from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And then if there are additional supports that are needed, they will set you up with those. Just some references. Hey, and I was pretty close to 7:30. We'll take a break just for a minute, just to kind of breathe. If you do need to go, I know it's 7:30, so if you need to go, that's great. I'm going to stick around for some Q&A if you have some questions. If you have some questions later on, I passed around my email address. Please feel free to reach out to me. But thanks for listening tonight. Thanks for letting me talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart. And please let me know if there's something that I can do for you in the future.